Hello everyone, and a very warm welcome to the Ali Sprotus channel. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a big thumbs up. Today, we are diving into the action-packed world of the 2013 film Furious 6. The whole crew, scattered to the winds after their Rio heist, suddenly finds a ghost from their past knocking on the door. Hobbs, now a high-ranking diplomatic security service agent, tracks down Dom Toretto. He needs Dom's specialized skills, the kind of high-octane, rule-bending expertise that only this particular family possesses, to take down a new threat. This threat is Owen Shaw, a former elite British military operative turned mercenary, who is orchestrating a series of audacious thefts across Europe involving highly sensitive military hardware, specifically a device called the Nightshade, capable of taking down entire power grids. Hobbs presents the deal. Help take down Shaw, and everyone gets full pardons, cleaning their slate. For Dom, whose life revolves around protecting his loved ones, especially his sister Mia, this is a powerful incentive, though the idea of leaving his tranquil island life is bittersweet. The mission naturally requires reassembling the old gang. Tej Parker, still tinkering with tech and enjoying the quiet life, is brought back into the fold. Roman Pierce, ever the flamboyant pragmatist, joins for the promise of another massive score and the sheer excitement. His knack for comic relief and quick thinking invaluable. Han Lu, whose quiet intensity and mechanical genius keep the group grounded, is back behind the wheel. Giselle Yashar, whose background as a former Interpol agent provides a crucial, pragmatic edge, is with Han, their romance a constant, grounding force amidst the chaos. Letty Ortiz, presumed dead after the events in Mexico, appears in security footage working alongside Shaw. Seeing her alive rips Dom apart. The mission immediately becomes intensely personal. Their pursuit of Shaw leads them across various European cities, each location demanding a different, spectacular set of vehicular acrobatics. In London, they face Shaw's crew, a collection of international specialists as skilled as Dom's own team. Shaw's right-hand man, a skilled driver named Riley Hicks, proves to be a significant obstacle, particularly because she has a deep connection to Letty, a connection that surfaces as a betrayal. As the narrative unfolds, the mystery of Letty's involvement deepens. Dom realizes she has amnesia, a tragic side effect of the explosion that supposedly killed her. Shaw manipulated her, feeding her a new life while exploiting her formidable driving skills. This revelation fuels Dom's determination. Rescuing Letty becomes as important as stopping Shaw. The action escalates dramatically. A memorable sequence involves them chasing a convoy through the tunnels of a European city, culminating in a thrilling, near-suicidal car jump between buildings, a feat only this crew would even contemplate. Tej, utilizing his technological prowess, becomes central in tracking and anticipating Shaw's moves. The climax hinges on a massive heist involving a military plane on a runway. Shaw attempts to escape with the Nightshade device, loaded onto a massive armored vehicle that essentially becomes a runaway tank. The ensuing chaos is pure spectacle, involving massive chases across the tarmac. In the middle of this, Dom confronts Shaw directly. The resolution brings personal victories alongside the mission's success. Dom manages to break through Letty's amnesia just as the dust settles. Shaw is apprehended by Hobbs's team. With the threat neutralized and the pardons secured, the Toretto family finally gets the clean slate they've earned, able to return to a life of relative peace, knowing that their bond, forged through shared adrenaline and unshakable loyalty, remains their greatest strength. The final scene confirms that Letty is truly back, a quiet moment of domesticity that feels hard-won after the sheer mayhem they endured. The call to action from Hobbs, a man whose own career trajectory has seen him move from a federal agent to a formidable government operative, was less a request and more an inevitable gravitational pullback to the life they tried to leave behind. For Dom, the quiet existence on that sun-drenched island felt fragile. The possibility of clearing the slate, however, represented a chance, however slim, for a future where his sister Mia and Brian O'Connor could finally live without the shadow of the law hanging over them. Brian, ever the resourceful ex-cop, carries the weight of responsibility, his smooth, almost thoughtful approach contrasting with Dom's raw intensity, making their partnership the functional core of the team. Reassembling the crew was like tuning a finely engineered machine, each member slotting perfectly into place. Tej, the architect of digital infiltration, always found the allure of advanced security systems irresistible, viewing global networks as puzzles begging to be dismantled. Roman, whose outward bravado often masks a sharp survival instinct, approaches every high-stakes situation with a healthy dose of neurotic humor, a necessary release valve for the group's tension. Han, whose calm demeanor often led adversaries to underestimate him, possesses a zen-like focus behind the wheel, seeing driving as a form of kinetic meditation. And Giselle, with her background in high-level espionage, provided the necessary anchor of cold logic. Her deep, unwavering trust in Han was a quiet testament to finding true partnership amidst the constant threat of danger. The revelation of Letty, looking hardened yet familiar, sent a jolt through Dom unlike anything a high-speed chase ever could. It wasn't just about the mission anymore. It was about retrieving a piece of himself that had been stolen. Watching her in action, witnessing her familiar aggression and flawless handling of a vehicle, affirmed that the spirit of the street racer who captured his heart was still there, just buried under trauma. Their pursuit through the labyrinthine streets of London and beyond became a brutal masterclass in vehicular warfare. Shaw's crew wasn't composed of mere thugs. They were disciplined professionals who understood the physics of destruction as well as Dom's team did. The tense standoff in the narrow alleyways and the strategic use of sheer mass during the chase sequences showcased the meticulous planning that underpinned their seemingly chaotic driving style, a style honed over years of outrunning the inevitable. The emotional core of the film rested on the slow, painful chipping away at Letty's enforced amnesia. Dom refused to accept the manufactured reality Shaw had built for her. Every close call, every shared look across a speeding vehicle was an attempt to reignite the memories, a desperate appeal to the shared history that defined them. This became palpable during the climactic sequence involving the military transport plane. As the massive aircraft lumbered down the runway, the focus shifted entirely to the confrontation between Dom and Shaw, a battle of wills mirroring their opposing philosophies on loyalty and the use of power. When Dom finally broke through the fog of Letty's memory, the resulting surge of emotion was powerful enough to momentarily sideline the immediate danger. It was a moment earned through relentless faith. With Shaw subdued and Hobbs ensuring the terms of the pardon were honored, the sense of relief was profound, not just because they survived, but because they were whole again. The final tableau, suggesting a return to domesticity, carried the weight of immense sacrifice, a hard-won peace achieved only because they chose family over freedom, repeatedly and fiercely. The sheer audacity of Owen Shaw's plan, to hold an entire nation hostage with the Nightshade device, demanded a response that bordered on the mythical, and that's why Hobbs bypassed conventional methods and called on the only people capable of such coordinated chaos. For Dom, the proposition was a Faustian bargain draped in governmental paper. The pardon represented not just personal freedom, but a viable future for Mia, who was visibly strained by the constant threat of exposure while raising her child alongside Brian. Brian, meanwhile, moved with the quiet competence of a man who understands the fragile nature of peace. His every decision weighed against the legacy he wants to leave his son. The process of remobilization was laced with familiar friction and affection. Roman's initial reluctance was always performative. Beneath the complaints about the danger and the lack of guaranteed profit, he craved the adrenaline rush that only being near Dom and death could provide. He serves as the necessary jester, deflecting terminal anxiety with over-the-top assessments of their impending doom. Tej, the team's technological oracle, treated the highly secure systems Shaw was exploiting like an invitation to a private digital party, his fingers flying across keyboards with the practiced ease of a concert pianist mastering a complex score. His loyalty is to the puzzle and the people who surround him. Giselle and Han remain the quiet center of gravity. Han's ability to remain utterly calm while executing maneuvers that defy the laws of physics is legendary. He finds grace in speed, an almost spiritual connection between man, machine, and asphalt. Giselle, whose previous life demanded sharp instincts and an ability to read deception instantly, was the perfect counterpoint to Han's meditative driving, ensuring their escape routes were analyzed not just for speed, but for long-term viability. The moment Letty appeared, cold, efficient, and working for the enemy, was the ultimate betrayal of Dom's carefully constructed reality. He saw not just a threat, but a ghost wearing the face of his love, a visceral pain that superseded any tactical objective. His obsession with her recovery wasn't sentimentality. It was the belief that if he couldn't save the person who defined his life, then none of the victories mattered. This mission became a deeply personal crusade to reclaim her soul from Shaw's psychological manipulation, which seemed predicated on exploiting Letty's inherent warrior spirit. The action sequences were escalating beyond mere car chases. They became exercises in vehicular engineering against the backdrop of global infrastructure. The famous runway sequence, where the crew had to physically anchor themselves to a massive, moving military transport plane to retrieve the device, perfectly encapsulates their methodology. Leverage overwhelming force and sheer nerve where technology fails. It requires an unnerving level of synchronized trust. One missed connection, one hesitation, and they all become debris. During the final, brutal confrontation, when Dom was physically fighting Shaw while simultaneously trying to reach the core of Letty's buried consciousness, the duality of the conflict was stark. Shaw represented the exploitation of elite skill for nihilistic gain, whereas Dom represented the channeling of those same skills in service of loyalty. When Letty's recognition finally broke through, triggered by Dom's unwavering belief, it wasn't just a memory returning, it was the complete realignment of the team's moral compass. With Shaw contained and the global threat averted, the pardons were the validation that their unconventional definition of justice, enforced by horsepower and brotherhood, had finally been recognized by the system, allowing them a hard-earned, fragile taste of normalcy. The aftermath of dismantling Shaw's network brought a profound, albeit temporary, sense of closure. With the Nightshade device secured and the threat neutralized, the formality of the pardons being processed by Hobbs served as a tangible reward for their extraordinary service. This final act of governmental acknowledgement felt strange. They were heroes for a day, validated by the very institutions they usually operated outside of. For Dom and Letty, the return to quietude was tinged with the delicate process of rebuilding their shared history, piece by painful piece. The amnesia was gone, but the trauma of Letty's manipulated existence lingered, requiring patience and the quiet reassurance of the established family unit. Brian and Mia found the space to breathe. The suffocating pressure lifted enough for them to focus entirely on their growing family, cementing their place as the stable anchor of the Toretto extended clan. It was a future they had risked everything for, finally within grasp. Roman, predictably, treated the quiet period as an opportunity for extravagant spending, punctuating the peace with loud proclamations about his newfound tax-free wealth, though he was always the first to answer the call when the rumble of an engine promised trouble. Tej used the downtime to upgrade his digital fortress, the quiet humming of advanced servers, replacing the frantic tempo of global pursuit. He understood that in their line of work, complacency was the precursor to ruin, and he always prepared for the next inevitable disruption. Han and Giselle, true to their nature, found a secluded place to simply exist together, their bond a quiet testament to finding sanctuary in the other person, regardless of the external chaos. Their philosophy was always to live fully in the present moment, a stark contrast to the constant looking over the shoulder that defined the other's recent past. However, in the world these drivers inhabited, true retirement is an illusion sustained only by distance and obscurity. The very act of completing a mission of this magnitude, involving international espionage and military-grade hardware, meant they had made enemies far beyond Owen Shaw. The Toretto crew had become legends, whispered about in the highest and lowest echelons of the underworld and government alike. While they were enjoying the warmth of a hard-won peace, the narrative threads of their past exploits, the fortunes made, the secrets unearthed, were already beginning to weave the next inescapable web, pulling them back toward the roar of the engine and the promise of necessary high-stakes action. The quiet life, they knew, was simply the time between the necessary explosions, the earned stillness, the scent of normalcy clinging to their surroundings, was deceptive. Dom, perpetually watchful, understood that clemency granted by the likes of Hobbs was not forgiveness, but a temporary loan. His gaze often drifted to Letty. She was present now, truly present, her eyes holding the shared history they'd fought so desperately to reclaim. Yet the shadow of manipulation lingered, a constant reminder of how easily one's identity could be hijacked. Their interactions were characterized by a deep tenderness, a shared understanding that every shared sunrise was a victory snatched back from the brink. Brian, ever the pragmatist with the heart of a protector, found himself wrestling with the paradox of their situation. They were free because they excelled at being criminals. He dedicated himself to establishing a legitimate rhythm for Mia and their son, pouring his tactical acumen into building a safe harbor, knowing full well that his own history made that harbor perpetually vulnerable. The joy he found in fatherhood was fierce, a desperate counterweight to the violence they were so proficient in. Roman, basking in the unaccustomed glow of being entirely off the grid and rich, found that leisure didn't suit his inherent need for drama. He'd frequently call Tej, ostensibly to discuss investments, but truly to manufacture elaborate, hypothetical danger scenarios just to hear the familiar sound of high-stakes planning. Tej, meanwhile, treated his secure home network like a private laboratory, not just for upgrading defenses, but for quietly monitoring the global currents, a self-appointed sentinel, ensuring that no new, highly organized threat could ever catch them completely unaware again. His technological intuition was their early warning system, a silent contract he held with the group. Han and Giselle, however, were the picture of serene detachment. They found beauty in moving with the flow, their philosophy rooted in enjoying the ride, wherever it led. Their time together was characterized by shared silences and mutual respect, a relationship built not on shared trauma, but on complementary strengths, Han's intuitive artistry with machinery, and Giselle's keen understanding of human motivation. They were the proof that amidst the wreckage, genuine, enduring partnership was possible. The narrative tension was never truly resolved. It was merely paused. The global notoriety gained from stopping Shaw ensured that powerful entities, governments, syndicates, and rival mercenaries now viewed the Toretto crew not as nuisances to be captured, but as an unparalleled, specialized asset, or perhaps a catastrophic threat that needed to be permanently neutralized. The very pardon Hobbs secured was a beacon, marking the precise coordinates of the world's most uniquely skilled drivers and thieves. The silence that followed was pregnant with possibility. The calm before the next storm that logic dictated was already gathering momentum on some distant horizon, drawn inevitably back to the magnetic pull of Dom Toretto and his unwavering commitment to family. The veneer of quiet settled over them like a thin sheet of ice, beautiful but dangerously fragile. Dom, ever the sentinel of his small world, found that true relaxation remained an abstract concept. His focus was channeled into ensuring Letty's integration back into their life felt organic, not forced. He'd watch her handle mundane tasks, making coffee, organizing supplies, with the same focused precision she once used to drift a car around a 90-degree corner, recognizing that the warrior spirit hadn't vanished, merely redirected. The emotional labor of healing was, in many ways, more demanding than outrunning Shaw's entire security detail. Brian found a strange irony in his newfound legal standing. He, the former undercover cop, was now the domestic pillar, his expertise in security applied entirely to baby monitors and neighborhood watch routines. He and Mia shared knowing glances. They had navigated the abyss and emerged into the sunlight, but the scent of gunpowder never entirely leaves the clothes. Brian carried a quiet respect for Hobbs. The agent had honored the bargain, proving that even within the rigid structures of authority, a sense of professional honor could exist. Roman, however, viewed the cessation of high-stakes theft as a personal affront. He began lobbying Dom relentlessly, not for another job, but for another event. He missed the near-death experiences, framing them as character-building exercises. "We're getting soft, Dom. We're going to forget how to breathe fire. Next time we need a little spice, a little artisanal destruction to keep the palate sharp." His bravado was a defense mechanism, a refusal to acknowledge the vulnerability that comes with having something substantial to lose. Tej was simultaneously the most secure and the most exposed. His digital sanctuary was impenetrable, yet he spent countless hours monitoring dark web chatter, his algorithms specifically tuned to detect any unusual movement pertaining to specialized military technology or known mercenary groups. He was preparing for the next geopolitical earthquake, understanding that the world doesn't forgive those who hold dangerous secrets and possess the means to exploit them. Giselle and Han continued their elegant withdrawal, but even their sanctuary had limits. They understood that their past lives as international operatives didn't simply evaporate with a government pardon. They were living on borrowed time, acutely aware that their talents made them desirable targets for recruitment or elimination by organizations larger than Owen Shaw. Their connection deepened in quiet contemplation. They were two highly tuned instruments, finding perfect, unsynchronized harmony away from the orchestra of chaos. The true weight of their recent actions settled in the unspoken understanding. Their involvement in stopping Shaw had placed a massive target on their backs, not just from the bad guys Shaw worked for, but potentially from governments unhappy about the sheer level of unauthorized vehicular mayhem enacted on their soil, even if it was for the greater good. The pardons were paper-thin shields against the long reach of global intelligence agencies, and Dom knew it. The calm wasn't an ending. It was merely the strategic regrouping before the next unavoidable engagement, one that would almost certainly test the limits of their redefined family loyalty once more. The fragile peace was always destined to be interrupted, for the Toretto crew operated on a frequency that attracted disaster. The first whisper of trouble wasn't a direct threat, but a subtle, almost undetectable shift in the digital landscape that only Tej could notice. While monitoring known shadow organizations, his systems flagged an unusual transfer of proprietary cryptographic keys. Keys that had been securely stored in the wreckage of Owen Shaw's final operation. This suggested one terrifying possibility. Shaw, though apprehended, had an infrastructure that was still operational, or perhaps he had an even more dangerous, unseen partner leveraging his stolen assets. Dom felt the familiar tightening in his chest, a physical manifestation of responsibility. He knew the price of their freedom extended beyond the signed documents. It required eternal vigilance. He sought out Hobbs, not for help, but for information. A quiet meeting in a nondescript location that bypassed official channels. Hobbs, ever the operative, confirmed the unease. Owen Shaw wasn't operating alone. He was the pawn, the specialist extraction expert hired by a much larger, unseen entity within the shadows of international power structures, an entity now keenly interested in the individuals who dismantled their asset. The true shockwave arrived in the form of a personal message meant only for Dom, a coded video feed showing a familiar figure standing over a captured, restrained Letty. This wasn't Shaw. This was Dom's other ghost, the one that haunted his periphery from the early days. Deckard Shaw, Owen's older brother, a man whose reputation in the covert world dwarfed even Owen's specialized skills. Deckard, a former high-level British intelligence operative known for his ruthlessness and methodical dismantling of opposition, was not interested in world domination, but in absolute, personal retribution for his brother's incarceration and humiliation. Deckard's message was chillingly direct. Dom's team had taken everything from his family, his brother, his reputation, and nearly his life. The price for their pardons would be paid in blood, starting with the woman Dom had just fought so hard to bring back. The challenge was laid out. Dismantle the global network that employed Owen, or watch Letty suffer a fate far worse than death. A fate engineered by a man who specialized in making people disappear completely. The film had shifted from a global security threat to an intimate, deeply personal vendetta, forcing the crew to pivot from heroism back to sheer survival, armed only with their loyalty and the roar of their engines. Deckard Shaw's emergence was the narrative equivalent of slamming a door shut on their brief moment of daylight. He wasn't driven by ideology or money like Owen. His motivation was pure, cold, ancestral vengeance, a trait that made him exponentially more dangerous. He embodied the ruthless efficiency Dom's crew had always sought to escape, a force of established, untouchable power. His background as a top-tier Black Ops specialist meant he understood counter-surveillance, infiltration, and vehicular combat on a fundamentally deeper, more tactical level than any street racer, even one as skilled as Dom. The sight of Letty held captive, her fierce spirit momentarily dimmed by calculated psychological warfare, reignited the core protective instinct in Dom that superseded all reason. This wasn't a game orchestrated by a mercenary. This was a predator targeting his mate. For Dom, Deckard represented the ultimate failure to outrun the past that had already taken his father, his mentor, and nearly Letty. He mobilized the team instantly, the quiet planning sessions replaced by an atmosphere of grim necessity. Brian reacted with practiced fury, his tactical mind immediately assessing the threats Deckard presented. The former cop understood the machinery of intelligence agencies, recognizing Deckard as a ghost that had escaped the system entirely. His commitment shifted from protecting his family from the law to protecting them from this apex predator. Roman's jokes evaporated. Facing Deckard demanded a seriousness that even he couldn't deflect with humor. He looked at Dom and saw not the casual leader, but the desperate husband, and that focus was palpable. Tej's role became critical, moving from tracking global threats to actively hunting a single, highly motivated individual. He had to anticipate a ghost's moves, mapping out potential safe houses and known contacts within the covert community Deckard originated from. Giselle and Han, sensing the shift to high-level espionage warfare, prepared to deploy their specialized skills in evasion and intelligence gathering, their partnership providing the necessary stealth operations that the main team's brute force driving couldn't manage. The confrontation quickly escalated beyond mere car chases into calculated ambushes designed to strip the Toretto family of their advantages, one by one. Deckard played chess on a kinetic board, utilizing superior technology and insider knowledge to anticipate their routes. He aimed to dismantle the family structure itself, knowing that if the trust fractured, Dom's ability to drive effectively would vanish. Every high-speed maneuver, every near-miss orchestrated by Deckard, was a reminder that the stakes were no longer pardons or money. They were existential, forcing Dom and his crew to rely on the one thing Deckard, operating alone in his singular quest, could never replicate: the deep, unwavering loyalty forged in years of shared adrenaline and mutual sacrifice. They had to become harder, smarter, and more unified than ever before to survive the calculated vengeance of the elder Shaw brother. The realization that Deckard Shaw was not just seeking revenge, but employing a calculated, surgical dismantling strategy struck the team with chilling clarity. He didn't just want to beat them in a race. He wanted to erase the very foundations of their operation, their sanctuary, and their sense of safety. His first move wasn't a grand spectacle, but a precise strike at their perceived safety net. A sophisticated, near-undetectable infiltration of Tej's heavily fortified digital command center. Tej described it later as an attack by a surgeon. No wasted motion, just the cold severing of vital connections. This forced Tej to abandon his digital fortress and rely solely on analog intuition and mobile hardware, stripping him of his preferred medium of control. The chase through the busy, ancient streets of Tokyo, a city where the density of infrastructure made high-speed maneuvers almost suicidal, became a masterclass in Deckard's superior tactical foresight. He didn't merely keep pace, he orchestrated traffic flow, setting up near-unavoidable intersections designed to separate Dom from the rest of the crew, specifically isolating him from Letty, whom Deckard was using as bait. During this sequence, Han's skill, usually characterized by that meditative calm, was tested to its absolute limit. Deckard seemed to know Han's preferred drifting lines before Han committed to them, forcing Han into panicked corrections that chipped away at his trademark serenity. The emotional pivot point arrived when Deckard, having successfully isolated and severely damaged one of their vehicles, a deliberate act designed to wound without killing, sent a direct transmission to Dom, a live feed showing him systematically dismantling one of the exotic cars Dom had painstakingly restored, reducing it to scrap metal with industrial precision. It was a message. Your toys, your hobbies, your past achievements, they are all vulnerable. For Dom, who views his vehicles as extensions of his own will and history, this act of mechanical vandalism was an attack on his very identity. Meanwhile, Giselle and Han were forced into a harrowing close-quarters engagement in the narrow walkways of an urban market. Giselle, utilizing her Interpol training, managed to momentarily incapacitate one of Deckard's operatives, but the cost was immense. Deckard, showing a cruel awareness of the team's attachments, used that split-second distraction to trigger a localized collapse, forcing Giselle to make a choice that betrayed her own survival instincts. She shoved Han clear of the falling debris, exposing herself to the full, devastating impact of the enemy's countermeasure. Her sacrifice wasn't an accident of combat. It was a targeted elimination of the most emotionally stabilizing element in Han's life, a deliberate move by Deckard to shatter Han's focus permanently. Han's reaction was immediate, raw, and utterly devoid of his previous calm. The loss of Giselle didn't fuel anger. It ignited a profound, soul-deep sorrow that manifested as the most reckless, single-minded driving Dom had ever witnessed. He drove not to win, but to reach Deckard, operating on pure grief. The pursuit transformed into a funeral procession where the coffin was the lead car. It was this raw, broken fury that ultimately forced Deckard to retreat temporarily, recognizing that he had pushed a man past the point of strategic thinking and into pure, uncontrolled vengeance, a variable he hadn't fully accounted for in his controlled calculus. The crew survived, but the victory was hollowed out by the catastrophic personal loss, cementing Deckard Shaw not just as an adversary, but as the architect of their deepest pain. The devastation of Giselle's sacrifice hung over the remaining crew like a shroud, fundamentally altering the dynamic of their pursuit. Han, hollowed out by grief, was barely functional, operating on autopilot fueled by an almost terrifying single-mindedness aimed solely at Deckard. It was Dom who had to intervene, physically pulling Han from the driver's seat during a tense lull, reminding him that Giselle's final act was one of saving him so that the fight could continue, not so he could commit immediate suicide by pursuit. This forced reckoning with their shared vulnerability became a turning point. They realized Deckard wasn't just trying to defeat them, he was trying to systematically destroy every reason they had left to keep fighting. Hobbs, observing the escalation from the periphery, understood that the rules of engagement had changed. He used his remaining leverage within the DSS to feed Dom highly classified, albeit indirect, intelligence on Deckard's known black sites and logistical hubs, tacitly acknowledging that this was no longer a government operation, but a deeply personal crusade that needed untraceable support. His tacit alliance spoke volumes about his grudging respect for the Toretto Code of Loyalty. The final act of retribution required a strategic move into hostile territory, a raid on a highly protected facility where Deckard was rumored to be holding Letty under extreme duress, forcing her to utilize her specialized skills for his own ends. This operation demanded the full spectrum of their rediscovered talents. Tej, channeling his focus away from grief toward tactical necessity, developed a complex, low-tech infiltration plan utilizing environmental camouflage and precise timing, minimizing digital signatures that Deckard's superior surveillance could track. Roman, stepping up with uncharacteristic maturity, took on the role of primary distraction and extraction specialist, leveraging his perceived frivolity to lure security forces into predictable patterns. The assault itself was a desperate ballet of coordinated violence and driving mastery. Dom and Brian moved in tandem, their synergy honed by years of facing impossible odds. When they finally reached Letty, she was physically unharmed, but psychologically battered, forced to pilot a prototype vehicle against training dummies in a simulated, high-speed environment designed to break her will. Dom didn't need grand speeches. He simply stood between her and the next simulation, his presence acting as the catalyst for her final emotional breakthrough, shattering the residual programming Deckard had instilled. The climactic confrontation with Deckard was less a car chase and more a battle of attrition across multiple levels of the fortress. Deckard, arrogant in his belief in his own tactical superiority, was finally undone by the one variable he couldn't model: the Toretto family's willingness to self-sacrifice for one another. In a critical moment where Deckard had Dom cornered, Brian executed a maneuver that mirrored their very first partnership years prior, an unexpected intervention that cost Brian dearly but successfully disabled Deckard's primary escape route. Finally, Dom managed to engage Deckard physically, a brutal, messy fight reflecting their opposing philosophies: Deckard's cold, systematic violence versus Dom's visceral defense of his lifeblood. Deckard was ultimately subdued, not by a governmental agency, but by the sheer, unified force of the crew, with Hobbs's arrival serving only to secure the perimeter and collect the pieces. The ensuing quiet was different this time. It wasn't the fragile peace preceding an inevitable storm. It was a deeper, more profound silence bought at a terrible cost. They had faced down the representation of their own darkest potential, the skilled operative turned nihilistic avenger, and survived. But the memory of Giselle remained a permanent, irreplaceable fixture in their shared history, a constant reminder that freedom in their world is always transactional, always demanding a sacrifice. The victory over Deckard Shaw felt less like triumph and more like survival, a brutal extraction from the maw of personal history. The emotional residue of Giselle's loss was the hardest burden to carry. Han, though physically present and integrated back into the group, moved with a muted intensity, his joy replaced by a fierce, quiet appreciation for the continuing presence of life. His driving, once meditative, was now an act of fierce remembrance, every perfect corner taken in homage to the woman who valued his spirit above her own safety. Brian and Mia, witnessing the depth of devastation Deckard inflicted, felt the fragile nature of their clean slate acutely. They understood that their pardons were merely a temporary reprieve in the ledger of global adversaries. Brian began pouring energy into establishing encrypted, decentralized communication networks for the crew, a contingency plan against any future governmental or criminal entity attempting to exploit their legal status. He was becoming the silent architect of their long-term security, his ex-cop instincts now dedicated solely to protecting this fractured but unbreakable family unit. Hobbs, having once again witnessed the sheer, terrifying efficacy of the Toretto methodology, maintained a respectful distance, yet his presence lingered as a shadow of official protection. He ensured the paperwork for their full exoneration was finalized, a necessary bureaucratic gesture, but he privately knew that these individuals could never truly re-enter the conventional world. They were too potent, too adept at operating outside the lines. Roman, for the first time, exhibited genuine sobriety regarding the stakes. Deckard's calculated cruelty had pierced his armor of bravado. He stopped joking about getting rich and started focusing on logistics, ensuring their various safe houses were stocked and prepared for immediate, unplanned evacuation. A practical approach born from realizing that their lives were the only true currency they possessed. Tej's reaction was perhaps the most telling. He didn't just upgrade his security. He began actively mapping the entire global intelligence community that Deckard had operated within, creating a living threat assessment profile. He was motivated by the chilling thought that Deckard's connections might still be active, looking to settle old scores in his brother's absence. Tej saw himself as the unseen guardian, the intelligence buffer protecting the more emotionally driven members of the crew. Dom, seeing the profound impact of the ordeal on everyone, especially Han, understood his role had evolved beyond just driving fast. He was the center of gravity, the emotional ballast. He didn't preach about family. He demonstrated it through unwavering presence. He recognized that while Deckard was neutralized, the spirit of vengeful power was inherent in their world. Their freedom wasn't a destination. It was a perpetual state of mobilization, maintained only by their refusal to let go of each other. The quiet moments, punctuated by the soft clicks of Tej's servers and Han's distant contemplation, were simply the necessary recalibration before the next inevitable collision with the forces determined to claim them or break them apart. The silence following the Shaw ordeal was thick, saturated with unspoken trauma and the lingering metallic scent of industrial sabotage. Dom found that the absence of immediate, tangible threats only amplified the internal noise. He spent hours in his garage, not tuning engines for a race, but simply sitting in the driver's seat of his Charger, hands resting on the wheel, feeling the cold, familiar leather, a grounding ritual against the ghost of Deckard's calculated cruelty. Letty, sensing his anchor drifting, would often join him, not needing to speak, just sitting beside him, their shared stillness a testament to a bond forged in the crucible of near obliteration. She was slowly relearning the rhythms of trust, her sharp instincts now dedicated to discerning genuine connection from manipulation. Brian found a strange solace in rigorous routine. He and Mia, acutely aware that their son's very existence was a testament to their successful defiance of the odds, immersed themselves in building an impenetrable layer of legitimate life around their family. Brian's tactical brilliance, once used to orchestrate prison breaks or aerial heists, was now channeled into vetting schools, securing property deeds, and creating impenetrable digital firewalls around their personal data. He was the foundation, solid and utterly dependable, the man who understood exactly how fragile the illusion of peace was and built structures robust enough to withstand its inevitable cracking. Roman, surprisingly, had undergone a subtle transformation. The fear instilled by Deckard, the sheer, impersonal competence of an operative who moved like a predator, had momentarily silenced his usual bombast. He channeled his energy into acquisition, not just of luxury goods, but of leverage. He began covertly investing in high-end, off-grid communication hardware and secure transport solutions, murmuring that they needed escape pods, not just sports cars, a concession to practicality that stunned his friends. Tej, the resident digital prophet, had become darker, his focus absolute. He wasn't just monitoring the digital sphere, he was mapping the connections Deckard had severed, trying to trace the source of the resources that armed such a precise individual. He suspected the true employer of the Shaws, the shadowy entity that funded their high-level destructive capabilities, was still operating, perhaps even angered by the disruption the Toretto crew caused. Tej viewed this as a high-stakes game of digital whack-a-mole. Every time he subdued a threat, he knew 3 more were spawning in the dark recesses of the web. Han remained the most altered. The loss of Giselle had stripped away the last vestiges of his detached, philosophical calm. He was now operating on a razor's edge of controlled aggression. His driving became less about artistry and more about sheer, unadulterated speed, a furious attempt to outrun the silence where Giselle used to be. He carried her presence like a physical weight, driving relentlessly, not toward a destination, but away from the unbearable stillness of absence. Dom watched Han closely, knowing that grief, unchecked, could be as destructive as any enemy. The underlying truth was that their pardons only shielded them from the law. They did nothing to protect them from the global network of former intelligence assets, assassins, and rival organizations who viewed the Toretto crew's combined skill set as a massive security vulnerability. They were too effective, too independent, and too much of a known commodity. The calm was merely the strategic pause before the inevitable next act, orchestrated by powers far more discreet and entrenched than the volatile Shaws. They were waiting, weapons loaded, not for the next call, but for the next undeniable signal that the quiet life was officially over. The 6th installment in the Fast and Furious saga, Furious 6, pivots from the globe-trotting heist narrative of its predecessor, Fast 5, to a more focused, geopolitical thriller framework, albeit one still heavily reliant on impossibly fast automobiles and physics-defying stunts. The film deliberately solidifies the franchise's evolution from street racing roots into a global espionage series, effectively leveraging the established chemistry of Dom Toretto's surrogate family. Central to the plot's motivation is the resurrection of Letty Ortiz, played by Michelle Rodriguez, whose presumed death in Fast and Furious 2009 provides the emotional anchor for Dominic Toretto, portrayed by Vin Diesel. Diesel's Toretto has always embodied a working-class ethos, his defining characteristic not criminality, but unwavering loyalty. This loyalty is weaponized by Luke Hobbs, portrayed by Dwayne Johnson, a character whose imposing physical presence and unwavering adherence to law enforcement structure, however loosely applied in practice, offers a necessary counterpoint to Toretto's outlaw morality. Johnson, by this point, was firmly established as a global action star, bringing an almost mythic sense of immovable force to the role, contrasting nicely with Diesel's more grounded, albeit equally superhuman, speed and brawn. The primary antagonist, Owen Shaw, skillfully played by Luke Evans, is crucial to the film's thematic structure. Shaw is presented not merely as a villain, but as a mirror to Toretto, a highly skilled operator and thief who commands his own tightly knit, highly specialized crew. Evans brings a calculated, almost cold British precision to the role, distinguishing him from the more impulsive villains of previous entries. His crew members are highly specialized, a tech expert, a precision driver, a heavy, reflecting the diverse skill sets Toretto's team has accumulated. This dynamic transforms the film into a battle of competing ideologies, of brotherhood and loyalty within the criminal underworld. The action sequences in Furious 6 are ambitious, perhaps the franchise's most overtly unbelievable up to that point, signaling a conscious decision to lean into pure spectacle. The highway chase in London, culminating in the infamous sequence involving tanks and the seemingly endless tarmac stretch, eschews any pretense of realism for pure kinetic energy. This willingness to discard narrative physics aligns with the careers of its key personnel. Director Justin Lin, who helmed 4 of the preceding films, had masterfully managed the franchise's tonal shift, understanding that audiences were buying into the spectacle and the charisma, not the mechanics of internal combustion. The introduction of Tej Parker's technological prowess, embodied by Ludacris, and Roman Pierce's comedic relief, courtesy of Tyrese Gibson, ensures the established character dynamics remain intact, functioning as necessary decompression between high-stakes operations. The team's structure allows the film to move seamlessly between vehicular stunts and hand-to-hand combat, often involving Gal Gadot's Giselle Yashar and Song Kang's Han Lu, whose chemistry was a fan favorite, even if their roles here are slightly reduced compared to the previous film. The climax, involving the pursuit of the Antonov An-124 cargo plane, serves as the definitive statement on the franchise's trajectory. Practical boundaries are irrelevant when family is at stake. The sequence is overtly operatic, a culmination of escalating absurdity that paradoxically feels earned because the emotional stakes, Toretto saving Letty and protecting his family unit, are continually reaffirmed. The film's coda, involving the surprise appearance of Han's supposed killer, Jason Statham's Deckard Shaw, immediately reestablishes the larger narrative scope for the next chapter. This moment is pivotal, transforming the individual conflicts into a single, interconnected tapestry of revenge and loyalty that defines the later Fast universe, ensuring that the emotional core, the found family, remains the series' most powerful engine, regardless of how many bridges they decide to jump off of, or how many planes they decide to chase down a motorway. The sheer audacity of the stunts in Furious 6 is not accidental. It is a direct reflection of the confidence the creative team, particularly Lin, felt after the success of Fast Five. They understood the audience had already suspended disbelief regarding the laws of physics. Now the challenge was to escalate the emotional consequence within that absurd framework. Diesel's performance relies heavily on that singular, guttural need to reclaim what he lost. His commitment to Letty, even when she is clearly operating under duress and memory loss, is portrayed with a raw vulnerability rarely seen in high-octane action franchises. Toretto's quiet moments, often involving gazing at old photographs or delivering earnest monologues about the sanctity of family, serve as essential ballast, preventing the film from floating away entirely into cartoonish territory. Michelle Rodriguez's return as Letty is handled with surprising care, given the demands of the action genre. Her struggle between her ingrained instincts, honed by Owen Shaw's training, and the magnetic pull of Toretto's world is the emotional fulcrum. Rodriguez has always excelled at portraying fierce independence, and here that independence is weaponized against her own past happiness. When she finally reconnects with Dom, it's not with a sudden, convenient flash of memory, but a gradual, painful recognition, a testament to the bond they forged in their shared, grittier street racing history, a history that the film often flashes back to with nostalgic brevity. Dwayne Johnson's Hobbs operates with the weary professionalism of a man who has seen too much, yet finds Toretto's chaotic morality strangely effective when aligned with his objectives. His recruitment strategy, offering pardons in exchange for service, is itself a microcosm of the film's central tension, operating outside the law for a perceived greater good. Johnson projects an authority that necessitates respect, whether he is subtly intimidating a government official or casually lifting a man with one hand during a brawl. The physical synergy between Diesel and Johnson in their inevitable, albeit brief, confrontations or cooperative action sequences feels less like hero versus anti-hero, and more like two immovable forces finding common ground through mutual, overwhelming competence. Luke Evans' Owen Shaw is particularly compelling because he embodies the dark side of Toretto's philosophy. Both leaders value their crew above all else, but Shaw's loyalty is transactional and cold, focused purely on the success of the mission, whereas Toretto's is unconditional and emotional. Evans infuses Shaw with a quiet intelligence. He is the planner, the architect, whose meticulous nature contrasts sharply with the messy, passionate execution favored by the Toretto crew. This contrast elevates the final confrontation beyond a simple race or fight. It becomes a philosophical argument waged with military hardware. The tension is amplified by the realization that Shaw understands the Toretto dynamic so intimately that he can exploit their weaknesses, namely, their attachment to one another. The film's European setting, particularly the extensive sequence in London, allows for a visual differentiation from the sun-baked streets and vibrant locales of previous installments. The overcast, industrial backdrop emphasizes the cold, mercenary nature of Shaw's operation. When the action shifts to the immense runway chase, the visual language switches from intricate urban maneuvering to overwhelming scale. The sequence where Letty's vehicle is dragged along by the massive tank, followed by Toretto's desperate leap across traffic islands to save her, is pure melodrama. Yet it functions precisely because the audience believes in the stakes of their relationship above all else. It is less about the mechanics of driving and more about the performance of devotion. Ultimately, Furious 6 succeeds because it recognizes that the franchise's real product is not the cars, but the continuous, expanding narrative of this unlikely, diverse family. The inclusion of Jason Statham at the very end serves as a masterful piece of franchise engineering. It immediately validates the escalating threats they have faced by introducing a higher-level threat, one specifically motivated by vengeance for a member of the opposing criminal family. This promise of personal retribution, rather than just governmental pursuit, ensures that the emotional investment required for the next chapter will be even higher, cementing the cyclical nature of loyalty and consequence that underpins every successful Fast and Furious outing. The film's success hinges on its skillful management of character expectations within an ever-increasing action envelope. Tej Parker, played by Ludacris, moves comfortably from the role of technical wizard to a crucial field operative, his often sarcastic delivery masking genuine bravery. Ludacris, whose career spans music and acting, brings an authentic urban swagger to the team that prevents the high-tech gadgetry from feeling too sterile. Similarly, Roman Pierce, the perennial source of comic anxiety, provides the necessary human reaction to the outlandish situations. Tyrese Gibson plays Roman's fear not as cowardice, but as a relatable counterpoint to Dom's relentless drive. Someone has to question whether jumping a car between skyscrapers is a good idea. This interplay keeps the audience grounded, even as the narrative leaps miles into the stratosphere of plausibility. Giselle Yashar, portrayed by Gal Gadot, is essential as the bridge between the high-stakes espionage world Shaw inhabits and the street-level loyalty Toretto champions. Her history as a mercenary gives her combat skills and strategic insight that complement Dom's sheer willpower. Her relationship with Han, while tragically cut short later in the saga, provides a genuine, mature romance amidst the chaos, grounding the team's motivations in something deeper than just adrenaline. The film benefits from leveraging this established, earned chemistry. The audience roots for them, not just to win the fight, but to survive together. The narrative structure heavily emphasizes redemption. For Toretto, redemption means reclaiming Letty's memory and soul. For Hobbs, it's about convincing an illegal outfit to serve the state, thereby validating his unconventional methods. This theme of found purpose permeates every character arc. Even the supporting antagonists, Shaw's specialized operatives, are depicted with a veneer of professionalism that suggests they, too, were drawn in by a compelling leader, only to find themselves facing a rival organization built on genuine affection. The iconic tank sequence, set against the vast expanse of a European motorway, is a triumph of logistical filmmaking merged with thematic intent. The visual metaphor is clear. The established order, the military hardware, is attempting to crush the outlaw family unit, but the family's unorthodox methods, using a customized muscle car to physically grapple with an armored vehicle, prove superior. It's about the adaptability and emotional drive of the Toretto clan overcoming sheer, overwhelming force. The sequence where Dom anchors his car to the plane as it attempts takeoff is the ultimate expression of this. Toretto is literally tied to the earth by his moral obligations, but he refuses to let go of his family member, even if it means defying aerodynamics itself. The film is less concerned with explaining how these feats are accomplished and entirely invested in showing why they must be accomplished. The stakes are always personal. When Owen Shaw attempts to isolate and exploit Letty's amnesia, he targets the very foundation of the Toretto philosophy. This is why the final, prolonged fight sequence between Dom and Shaw, occurring amidst the wreckage of the plane, feels so significant. It's a battle for ideological supremacy in the art of loyalty, waged by two men who are essentially highly skilled, hyper-competent versions of the same archetype. Furious 6 solidifies the franchise's understanding that the audience is now invested in this extended family portrait, viewing the impossible stunts as mere punctuation marks in an ongoing soap opera of brotherhood and survival. The true genius of Furious 6 in retrospect lies not just in its escalating action, but in how seamlessly it lays the groundwork for the franchise's shift toward full-blown, mythology-driven spectacle, catalyzed by the introduction of Deckard Shaw. Jason Statham's abrupt appearance post-credits serves as a lightning rod, instantly recontextualizing the previous 90 minutes of high-speed escapades. This was no longer just about stopping a thief or regaining a lost love. It was about establishing a lineage of consequence. Statham, known for his grounded, brutally efficient action style, honed in films like The Transporter, brings an immediate, palpable danger that contrasts sharply with the almost jovial camaraderie of Toretto's team. His arrival transforms the narrative from a self-contained geopolitical thriller into the opening salvo of a prolonged vendetta. This move demonstrates an acute awareness from the producers, including Diesel himself, of the need for escalating antagonism that mirrors the escalating capabilities of the heroes. Hobbs's casual mention of Shaw earlier in the film felt like exposition. Statham's cold-blooded execution of Han ensures that exposition pays off with visceral, immediate threat. It's a brilliant piece of cross-franchise synergy, leveraging Statham's established persona as the relentless professional killer against Diesel's deeply emotional outlaw leader. This setup effectively raises the emotional debt Toretto's crew owes. They have always operated outside the system, protected by their collective strength and by the fact that their targets were often simply criminals. Now they have crossed paths with a ghost who plays by a darker, more personal code. The implications for the next installment are clear. The gloves are officially off, and the rules of engagement, however flexible they already were, will be completely abandoned. The stakes shift from surviving a mission to ensuring long-term safety for everyone Toretto cares about, setting the stage for the intensely personal conflict that would define Furious 7. The franchise recognizes that the greatest drama comes not from external threats like governments or weapons dealers, but from internal, personal debts that must be settled, often through more unbelievable feats of automotive acrobatics. The post-credits scene's devastating efficiency in setting the emotional chessboard for the future is a textbook example of smart franchise management. It directly addresses the lingering sense of impunity the crew might have felt after successfully navigating the Owen Shaw crisis. Han's death, previously a mystery or a possible exit point for the character, is now retroactively framed as a targeted assassination, tying the seemingly disparate threads of corporate espionage and street-level crime into a single knot of vengeance. This move allows the storytelling to lean harder into the melodrama, as personal loss, the ultimate motivator for Dom Toretto, is now explicitly manufactured by the next antagonist. Statham's Deckard Shaw is the perfect embodiment of this new, heightened reality. Where Owen Shaw was the calculated tactician, Deckard is the blunt instrument of professional retribution, possessing a lethal pragmatism that instantly dwarfs the skills of the previous villains. His meticulous surveillance and surgical strike against Han, shown in the quiet, sunlit oblivion of Tokyo, underscores a chilling professionalism. This isn't the messy work of a career thief. This is the focused rage of an operative avenging a brother. This distinction is vital. Deckard Shaw operates with a coldness that Toretto's crew, for all their criminal activity, can never truly replicate, because their actions are always filtered through the lens of affection. The emotional fallout for the core team, though largely implied in the immediate aftermath of Furious 6, must linger over their subsequent actions. The awareness that their greatest victory has birthed their greatest threat forces a shift in their operational mindset. No longer are they merely fighting for independence or profit. They are now fighting for survival against an enemy who knows their structure intimately and is motivated by an equally powerful, albeit darker, code of familial duty. This creates a fascinating moral symmetry. Dom fights to protect his found family, and Deckard fights to avenge his biological one. The confrontation becomes an inevitable collision between two equally potent, yet antithetical, definitions of loyalty. This strategic pivot ensures the continued relevance and escalating stakes of the series. By giving the next installment a deeply personal antagonist with a proven track record of lethality, embodied by a globally recognized action star, the filmmakers guarantee audience investment. The audience knows Toretto's crew can outrun tanks and planes, but can they outmaneuver a methodical assassin whose sole focus is them? Furious 6, therefore, is not just an action film. It is the necessary bridge that transforms a successful action franchise into an ongoing, serialized epic driven by an ever-deepening tapestry of personal relationships and existential threat. The narrative weight carried by the post-credits revelation forces a re-evaluation of the entire film's tone. Up until that final chilling shot, Furious 6 allowed itself a certain degree of almost playful absurdity, indulging the audience's acceptance of physics-defying spectacle as part of the brand identity. The film wore its unrealistic elements with a confident wink. However, Deckard Shaw's introduction snaps that playful veneer clean away, injecting a serious dose of mortal peril back into the proceedings. The implication is that while Toretto's crew has become adept at handling government operatives like Hobbs or highly competent mercenary groups like Owen Shaw's, they have zero defense mechanism against pure, targeted vengeance delivered by a seasoned professional assassin. This new dynamic heightens the perceived emotional fragility of the Toretto unit. Their strength has always been their collective nature, a fortress built on mutual trust and shared history. Deckard Shaw's objective, as established, is not conquest or theft. It is exacting personal toll for the injuries inflicted upon his brother. This targeted focus turns the next chapter into an inherently defensive posture for Dom, forcing him to protect not just the mission's success, but the very existence of his circle. The audience anticipates a narrative where Toretto's characteristic optimism will be severely tested by an enemy who seems utterly incapable of understanding or respecting the bonds that define the protagonists. Furthermore, the return of Letty, while emotionally satisfying within Furious 6, suddenly gains a layer of tragic irony in light of Han's murder. Letty's redemption, her regaining of memory, and her reassimilation into the family was the central emotional arc of this installment. Yet, this victory is instantly overshadowed by the knowledge that for another key family member, the ending was far more permanent and brutal. This contrast ensures that the triumph feels ephemeral, a temporary reprieve before the inevitable storm summoned by Statham's character. The ensemble's reaction to this news in the following narrative, though unseen within Furious 6, is crucial to understanding the franchise's trajectory. The light-hearted banter and reliance on their established roles, Roman's comedy, Tej's tech, must be tempered by a grim realization that their lifestyle now invites deadly, professional consequences far beyond the scope of any heist. They are transitioning from high-end criminals to targets of an international covert operator, a shift demanding a more strategic, less reactive approach, which contrasts perfectly with Toretto's usual modus operandi of meeting overwhelming force with overwhelming loyalty. Furious 6 effectively serves as the glorious, action-packed crescendo before the saga plunges headlong into its most personal and violent chapter yet. The deliberate elevation of personal stakes through the introduction of Deckard Shaw fundamentally alters the franchise's understanding of its own internal mythology. Before this point, the conflict generally resolved itself with the heroes outsmarting or overpowering a specific threat, a corrupt official, a rival crew, or a terrorist organization seeking specialized tech. The threat was transactional. Shaw's motivation, however, is filial duty distilled into professional assassination. This distinction matters profoundly. It weaponizes the very concept of family, the central thesis of the entire series, against the family itself. Dom Toretto's moral compass, always pointing toward protection and inclusion, is suddenly facing an adversary who adheres to an equally rigid, albeit toxic, code of protecting his own blood. This narrative framing grants tremendous weight to the earlier, seemingly self-contained acts of heroism within Furious 6. Every successful escape, every deployment of overwhelming force against Owen Shaw is now implicitly catalogued and assessed by Deckard Shaw. The sequence where Toretto's team successfully neutralizes Owen's massive armored convoy feels less like a victory for law and order, and more like an act of brazen defiance that demands immediate, professional retribution. The scale of the action, the near destruction of a London thoroughfare to stop a tank, is no longer just spectacle. It is the very provocation that summons a higher order of danger. Furthermore, the film's handling of Letty's return, which is meant to be the emotional resolution of this chapter, becomes retrospective preparation for the next. Her struggle with memory loss and her forced alignment with the antagonist provided Dom with an understanding of the psychological warfare that Shaw's world employs. If Owen could manipulate Letty's past, Deckard possesses the ruthlessness to exploit the current emotional vulnerabilities of the entire crew. The tentative peace Toretto achieves with Letty at the close of the film is fragile, existing under the shadow of the impending reckoning. It confirms that in the universe the filmmakers have so carefully constructed, one cannot simply retire to a quiet life. The consequences of one's actions, especially those taken in defense of loved ones, inevitably circle back in the form of another, even more dangerous, familial obligation. The transition from the adrenaline rush of the highway and runway sequences to the somber, chilling realization delivered by Statham's appearance marks a significant tonal maturation for the Fast and Furious saga. Director Justin Lin and the creative team understood that sustained audience engagement requires not just bigger explosions, but deeper emotional leverage. By making the next villain deeply personal and directly related to a casualty of the previous arc, they effectively shift the narrative gears from global spectacle to deeply intimate warfare. This restructuring allows the audience to view the established characters, particularly Dom, not just as highly skilled drivers, but as flawed protectors haunted by the costs of their freedom. Vin Diesel's capacity to convey profound unspoken guilt is central to selling this transition. Having successfully saved Letty, the implicit understanding is that this victory was purchased at the expense of Han's life, a debt now called in by a far more formidable collector. Dom's quiet intensity, often expressed through lingering glances at his loved ones, is now overlaid with a heavy burden of responsibility. He is no longer just the leader. He is the unwitting catalyst for the danger now descending upon his crew. This emotional weight grounds the subsequent, even more outrageous stunts, as each feat of driving prowess becomes an act of desperate preservation rather than simple bravado or profit. The narrative arc established here also subtly enhances the role of Luke Hobbs. Dwayne Johnson's character, the lawman who has repeatedly bent the rules to work with Toretto, is now positioned as an asset whose previous victories over international criminals have consequences beyond the immediate mission parameters. Hobbs likely understands the meticulous, professional danger posed by an operative like Deckard Shaw better than the street-oriented Toretto crew. His necessary alliance in the next film will be less about gaining pardons and more about pooling resources to fight an enemy who operates outside the easily traceable networks of conventional crime, suggesting a future where state security and outlaw skill must finally merge seamlessly. The introduction of Deckard Shaw serves as the ultimate validation of the team's enhanced capabilities. They only attract threats of this magnitude because they have proven capable of neutralizing threats of a lower caliber. Shaw represents the price of high-level success. He is the embodiment of the butterfly effect in the criminal underworld. Toretto's decision to save the world, or at least save Letty, by interfering with Owen Shaw's operations, has created a direct, personal enemy who views their very existence as an affront. This sets the foundation for a conflict defined not by who can drive fastest, but by who is willing to sacrifice more in the name of their respective loyalties, a defining philosophical battle for the franchise's continuation. The lingering feeling after the credits roll on Furious 6 is one of earned exhaustion followed by immediate dread, a perfectly calibrated emotional whiplash engineered to propel the audience into the next chapter. The film's narrative structure successfully used Letty's return as the emotional payoff for the previous installments, offering the audience catharsis for Dom's long-standing grief. However, the insertion of Deckard Shaw acts as a calculated narrative reset, ensuring that no character nor the audience can settle into a state of relief. This shift signals the franchise's commitment to never allowing its heroes true peace, a necessity for long-term serialized storytelling. Jason Statham's brief appearance is devastating precisely because of its quiet efficiency, a complete counterpoint to the cacophony of the preceding final battle. He is not a flamboyant criminal mastermind. He is a cold, meticulous professional who operates with surgical precision. This professionalism immediately puts the Toretto crew, whose greatest strength is their improvisational chaos and passionate teamwork, at a severe tactical disadvantage. Han's death, revealed to be Shaw's priority target, becomes the tragic price paid for the team's global interference. It elevates Han from a fun, laid-back member to a martyr whose memory will fuel the next arc's primary motivation. For Dom Toretto, this development forces a confrontation with the true cost of his philosophy. His mantra has always been that family is the only thing that matters, and he has built his surrogate family by pulling people out of dangerous situations. Yet, Deckard Shaw demonstrates that pulling someone out of one danger only exposes them to a deadlier, more personal one waiting in the wings. This realization demands a new level of strategic thinking from the crew, moving beyond simply outdriving an opponent to actively defending against a relentless predator. The implied need for greater technical sophistication, something Tej and Brian O'Connor, Paul Walker, usually supply, will now have to be augmented by a darker, more ruthless awareness of covert operations. The contrast between the brothers, Owen and Deckard, also serves to illuminate the Toretto dynamic further. Owen Shaw was a professional criminal seeking material gain, whose primary weakness was his emotional attachment to his specialized team, a weakness Dom exploited. Deckard, motivated by the seemingly purer, albeit vengeful bond of brotherhood, is arguably a more dangerous opponent because his driving force, avenging kin, mirrors Dom's own ultimate loyalty. This mirrors the very core of the franchise. The conflict is no longer about right versus wrong, but about two highly competent groups demonstrating diametrically opposed interpretations of familial obligation. Furious 6 thus stands as the necessary pivot point where the series graduates from being about elaborate heists to being about deeply personal vendettas waged on a global scale, cemented by the silent promise of lethal payback. The deliberate choice to conclude Furious 6 with such a stark cliffhanger, rather than a soft fade-out on Dom and Letty's reunion, signals a fundamental shift in the franchise's relationship with its audience. It's a calculated manipulation of sentiment. The emotional reward of Letty's full return is immediately juxtaposed with the catastrophic consequence of Han's murder. This ensures that the audience's primary emotional state upon leaving the theater is not satisfaction, but an urgent desire for resolution regarding Deckard Shaw. The narrative successfully transforms passive viewing into active anticipation. This impending conflict also serves to subtly redefine the character's individual skill sets in relation to global espionage. Tej Parker, Ludacris's character, whose technological aptitude was heavily featured in the earlier acquisition of Owen Shaw's device, now faces an adversary likely operating with counter-surveillance and deep cover resources that eclipse what they faced previously. Tej's role evolves from simply hacking systems to actively safeguarding the team from infiltration, a much more paranoid, defensive position. Similarly, Brian O'Connor, played by Paul Walker, whose background is rooted in law enforcement undercover work, finds his tactical and investigative skills thrust to the forefront. His ability to understand the structure of a professional operation becomes paramount when facing an enemy who doesn't rely on brute force, but on methodical takedowns. The legacy of Letty's brief turn to villainy under Owen Shaw's influence also plays into the threat posed by Deckard. Because Shaw is exacting revenge for Owen, the team is implicitly aware that their opponents understand the internal mechanics of their loyalties. They know that Toretto's primary vulnerability is his willingness to sacrifice mission success for the immediate safety of any single family member. Deckard Shaw becomes the specialist in exploiting that exact emotional framework. This elevates the tension beyond physical obstacles. The psychological warfare becomes the true battleground. The audience anticipates scenes where Shaw will not necessarily try to outdrive Dom, but rather force Dom into impossible moral choices, echoing the very dilemma Letty faced when she was forced to fight her past loves. The film's overall success in this transitional phase lies in its ability to integrate spectacular, nearly impossible set pieces, the tank chase, the plane retrieval, while simultaneously ensuring the audience remains invested in the deeply human motivations driving these acts. The physics-defying stunts become the visual manifestation of Toretto's unshakable belief in family, an almost superhuman dedication that technology and professional assassins cannot easily compute. By the end of Furious 6, the cars are secondary. The mythology of the Toretto family as an unbreakable, globally influential unit is the main commodity, and Deckard Shaw is the mechanism engineered to test that bond to its absolute breaking point. The culmination of Furious 6 in the chaotic pursuit of the Antonov cargo plane serves as the ultimate declaration of the franchise's new identity, a reliance on emotional momentum overriding any semblance of practical limitations. The scene where Dom clings to the exterior of the vehicle, essentially strapping himself to the fate of his family member as they careen down a highway, is not intended to be believable. It is intended to be symbolically resonant. Diesel's performance in these moments is almost devotional. He portrays Toretto not as an action hero executing maneuvers, but as a man physically refusing to let go of his moral center, which, in this universe, is explicitly embodied by Letty. This sequence is pure melodrama, but it works because the audience has been invested for 6 films in the emotional architecture of this surrogate brotherhood. The survival of the core group, juxtaposed against the brutal efficiency of Deckard Shaw's arrival, establishes a crucial thematic division: the distinction between survival through chaotic loyalty and death through professional isolation. Owen Shaw's crew, for all their specialized training, the driver, the tech expert, the heavy, were ultimately a collection of skilled individuals brought together by a leader. They lacked the unconditional, deeply rooted history that binds Toretto's group. Deckard Shaw's motivation, rooted in biological brotherhood, makes him a dark mirror to Dom, suggesting that the purest form of loyalty, when untempered by empathy, leads directly to targeted destruction. This contrast underscores the evolving roles of the supporting players. Roman Pierce's comic fear, while providing necessary levity, gains a new edge. He is fearful because he understands, perhaps more intuitively than the stoic Dom, that they are dealing with an adversary who plays for keeps and lacks the moral ambiguity they are used to operating within. Tyrese Gibson expertly conveys the rising sense of dread that accompanies the shift from operating against governments to operating against an invisible assassin. Similarly, the technological wizardry of Tej Parker, instrumental in tracking Owen Shaw, now seems insufficient against an enemy who likely operates off the grid, forcing the team to rely more heavily on Brian O'Connor's instinctual field experience and understanding of covert protocol to survive the hunt. Ultimately, Furious 6 masterfully executes the transition from a series about crimes to a series about consequences. The previous installments focused on achieving a goal: the score, the freedom, the rescue. This film successfully frames the entirety of their previous successful endeavors as the justification for the extreme threat that follows. The massive scale of the action, the tanks and the planes, becomes the backdrop against which the small, intimate realization dawns. They have made themselves targets of the highest caliber, ensuring that the next chapter will be defined by attrition and personal sacrifice rather than strategic planning or triumphant getaway driving. The narrative device of using Han's death as the catalyst for the next chapter subtly weaponizes nostalgia, a powerful currency the franchise has accumulated over years of interconnected storytelling. For the audience, Han Sung Kang, whose relaxed, charismatic presence was a grounding counterpoint to Dom's intensity, represents an innocence lost. His absence is no longer a mere plot point resolved by a mid-credits scene. It becomes an active, motivating ghost hanging over every decision Toretto's crew makes moving forward. This ensures that the emotional stakes, which were briefly satisfied by Letty's return, are immediately, and perhaps brutally, re-established at an even higher level of severity. Deckard Shaw's meticulous revenge plot functions as a narrative equalizer. The team has consistently achieved success through superior vehicular improvisation and brute force teamwork. Shaw's calculated, almost invisible approach suggests that raw power and teamwork may not be enough against calculated malice. This forces an evolution in character approach, particularly for Brian O'Connor. Brian, the former FBI agent, must transition from occasionally bending the rules to actively embracing the morally gray space he once sought to police. His skill set, understanding agency protocols, anticipating surveillance, becomes suddenly invaluable in a fight against a man who appears to be an unregistered, highly effective Black Ops agent. Paul Walker's performance in these subsequent arcs relies heavily on portraying the strain of navigating this ethical minefield while trying to maintain the family's core integrity. Furthermore, the structure of the final confrontation in Furious 6, a battle against an overwhelming military force, sets a clear precedent for the level of external opposition the team can now handle. They won against the tank and the plane because the threat was external and identifiable. Deckard Shaw, operating from the shadows, represents an insidious internal threat. He can infiltrate their safe spaces, target their weaknesses not through superior hardware, but through superior knowledge of their personal lives. This shift from large-scale environmental hazards to targeted, personal attacks enhances the intimacy of the danger. When Dom looks at Letty, he sees the success of his devotion. When he looks at the road ahead, he now sees the cold, determined eyes of the man seeking to avenge his brother by destroying that very devotion. The sequence with Hobbs, who remains behind in custody while the Toretto crew executes the final mission, also gains weight. Hobbs is the ultimate representation of the compromised state, a man of the law, forced to operate outside it. His temporary absence during the climax emphasizes that Toretto's crew must now learn to operate with a professional, detached ruthlessness, the very trait that makes Deckard Shaw so terrifying, or risk annihilation. Furious 6 thus closes by handing the baton of consequence to the next film, confirming that the franchise's enduring appeal lies not in how high they can jump, but in how deeply they are willing to dive into moral complexity to protect the people they call family. The necessity of escalating the antagonism following Furious 6 reveals a sophisticated, almost meta-awareness by the filmmakers regarding franchise sustainability. They understood that after achieving narrative closure for Letty's story and deploying near-impossible set pieces involving military hardware, the only way forward was to intensify the emotional stakes to a degree that justifies the subsequent, even more unbelievable feats. Deckard Shaw, therefore, is not merely the next villain. He is the personification of the franchise's accrued narrative debt. Every successful escape, every defied law of physics committed by Toretto's crew has been logged and assessed by this cold, efficient mercenary, transforming every past victory into future liability. Jason Statham's portrayal imbues Shaw with a quiet menace that contrasts sharply with the almost baroque theatricality of the Toretto crew. Where Dom operates on instinct, heart, and adrenaline, Shaw operates on paperwork, precision, and grievance. This difference in methodology makes him terrifyingly unpredictable. He doesn't need a high-speed chase to prove his point. A carefully placed explosion or a well-timed ambush suffices. This forces the team to elevate their strategy beyond simply driving faster or crashing harder. They must learn to think defensively, adopting the kind of caution that Roman Pierce has always advocated, but now channeled through deadly necessity rather than comic relief. The post-credits sequence, in its deliberate cruelty, effectively retrofits Han's death with profound significance. Han, the connoisseur of drifting and calm demeanor, becomes the martyr whose sacrifice frames the new operating principle. You do not escape the consequences of your actions, especially when those actions involve disrupting the highly specialized, insular worlds of elite operatives. This imbues the whole ensemble with a shared sense of survivor's guilt, a burden that will inevitably manifest in the performances. We anticipate seeing this manifest in the quiet moments, Brian and Mia's increased anxiety about bringing children into this life, Tej's paranoia about digital footprints, and Tej's increased vigilance in securing their communications. Crucially, the setup allows for the reintroduction of Luke Hobbs into a position of greater parity with Dom. Hobbs, the government man committed to unconventional means, now finds his mandate entirely validated by the emergence of Shaw, a man operating far outside established international criminal profiles. Hobbs's initial interactions with Toretto were transactional, based on leveraging criminal expertise against a shared, immediate enemy. Now the threat posed by Shaw is so extreme that it necessitates a true merging of their worlds. Law enforcement pragmatism, meeting outlaw loyalty. This alliance promises a fusion of high-tech surveillance and raw driving power, suggesting the next film will require both impeccable planning, Hobbs, Tej, and explosive, emotional execution, Dom Bryan. Furious 6 ends not just with a rescue, but with the calculated summoning of the darkest possible consequence, ensuring the saga's trajectory is now permanently locked onto an axis of sustained, personal vengeance. Hello everyone, and a very warm welcome to the Ali Sprotus channel. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a big thumbs up. Today, we are diving into the action-packed world of the 2013 film Furious 6. The whole crew, scattered to the winds after their Rio heist, suddenly finds a ghost from their past knocking on the door. Hobbs, now a high-ranking diplomatic security service agent, tracks down Dom Toretto. He needs Dom's specialized skills, the kind of high-octane, rule-bending expertise that only this particular family possesses, to take down a new threat. This threat is Owen Shaw, a former elite British military operative turned mercenary, who is orchestrating a series of audacious thefts across Europe involving highly sensitive military hardware, specifically a device called the Nightshade, capable of taking down entire power grids. Hobbs presents the deal. Help take down Shaw, and everyone gets full pardons, cleaning their slate. For Dom, whose life revolves around protecting his loved ones, especially his sister Mia, this is a powerful incentive, though the idea of leaving his tranquil island life is bittersweet. The mission naturally requires reassembling the old gang. Tej Parker, still tinkering with tech and enjoying the quiet life, is brought back into the fold. Roman Pierce, ever the flamboyant pragmatist, joins for the promise of another massive score and the sheer excitement. His knack for comic relief and quick thinking invaluable. Han Lu, whose quiet intensity and mechanical genius keep the group grounded, is back behind the wheel. Giselle Yashar, whose background as a former Interpol agent provides a crucial, pragmatic edge, is with Han, their romance a constant, grounding force amidst the chaos. Letty Ortiz, presumed dead after the events in Mexico, appears in security footage working alongside Shaw. Seeing her alive rips Dom apart. The mission immediately becomes intensely personal. Their pursuit of Shaw leads them across various European cities, each location demanding a different, spectacular set of vehicular acrobatics. In London, they face Shaw's crew, a collection of international specialists as skilled as Dom's own team. Shaw's right-hand man, a skilled driver named Riley Hicks, proves to be a significant obstacle, particularly because she has a deep connection to Letty, a connection that surfaces as a betrayal. As the narrative unfolds, the mystery of Letty's involvement deepens. Dom realizes she has amnesia, a tragic side effect of the explosion that supposedly killed her. Shaw manipulated her, feeding her a new life while exploiting her formidable driving skills. This revelation fuels Dom's determination. Rescuing Letty becomes as important as stopping Shaw. The action escalates dramatically. A memorable sequence involves them chasing a convoy through the tunnels of a European city, culminating in a thrilling, near-suicidal car jump between buildings, a feat only this crew would even contemplate. Tej, utilizing his technological prowess, becomes central in tracking and anticipating Shaw's moves. The climax hinges on a massive heist involving a military plane on a runway. Shaw attempts to escape with the Nightshade device, loaded onto a massive armored vehicle that essentially becomes a runaway tank. The ensuing chaos is pure spectacle, involving massive chases across the tarmac. In the middle of this, Dom confronts Shaw directly. The resolution brings personal victories alongside the mission's success. Dom manages to break through Letty's amnesia just as the dust settles. Shaw is apprehended by Hobbs's team. With the threat neutralized and the pardon secured, the Toretto family finally gets the clean slate they've earned, able to return to a life of relative peace, knowing that their bond, forged through shared adrenaline and unshakable loyalty, remains their greatest strength. The final scene confirms that Letty is truly back, a quiet moment of domesticity that feels hard-won after the sheer mayhem they endured. The call to action from Hobbs, a man whose own career trajectory has seen him move from a federal agent to a formidable government operative, was less a request and more an inevitable gravitational pullback to the life they tried to leave behind. For Dom, the quiet existence on that sun-drenched island felt fragile. The possibility of clearing the slate, however, represented a chance, however slim, for a future where his sister Mia and Brian O'Connor could finally live without the shadow of the law hanging over them. Brian, ever the resourceful ex-cop, carries the weight of responsibility, his smooth, almost thoughtful approach contrasting with Dom's raw intensity, making their partnership the functional core of the team. Reassembling the crew was like tuning a finely engineered machine, each member slotting perfectly into place. Tej, the architect of digital infiltration, always found the allure of advanced security systems irresistible, viewing global networks as puzzles begging to be dismantled. Roman, whose outward bravado often masks a sharp survival instinct, approaches every high-stakes situation with a healthy dose of neurotic humor, a necessary release valve for the group's tension. Han, whose calm demeanor often led adversaries to underestimate him, possesses a zen-like focus behind the wheel, seeing driving as a form of kinetic meditation. And Giselle, with her background in high-level espionage, provided the necessary anchor of cold logic. Her deep, unwavering trust in Han was a quiet testament to finding true partnership amidst the constant